All right, welcome everybody. Today is the Board of County Commissioners' regular meeting of Wednesday, August 14th, 2019. Commissioner Postman is on a family vacation today, so I will serve as chairman. John, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
We have one addition to the agenda. It is emergency resolution, the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, authorizing an intergovernmental agreement between La Plata County for economic assistance services. I would suggest that that be added at the end of individual consideration items first reading. So I guess that'd be 4A maybe.
Okay.
Do they need to?
I would entertain a motion from the board to add this to our agenda.
So moved.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Are there any members of the public who would wish to make comments at this time? Ellen?
Is it here?
Either one. Just make sure that the red light is on the microphone.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name's Ellen Anderson, and I was here just about a year ago. It had to do with a different issue, and I want to thank you for resolving that issue. It was the airport curfew violations. Thank you. And at that time, I said I had lived in Aspen Village since 1979, and I planned to be there for a long time. Still true. I'm still there, and I still hope to be there for a long time. The reason I'm here today is because I and some of my neighbors are very distressed at what's going on at the bottom of the hill, the entrance to our neighborhood at what used to be called the Aspen Quick Mart. Now it's called the Woody Creek Station. There is a huge amount of dirt that has been moved, and I brought some visual aids that are not PowerPoint. They're old-fashioned. May I approach the bench?
You could
Or
pass them around and we could all look at them.
Oh, can you project them? Cool, okay, very good. As you know, the now it's called the Woody Creek Station, is right at the entrance to Aspen Village, and the adjacent property owner is Aspen Village Metro District. I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes. That's the first one, and this is the second one. Maybe I should.
I won't capture all of it.
Oh, well, then we need to maybe move it around a little bit, because I want you to see the scope. I want you, that's the hole, right there, at the entrance to Aspen Village. And if you notice the wheelbarrow, that gives you an idea. It's several stories tall, that excavation. And Pickens County granted an exemption to the land use planning code. We find this absolutely preposterous. I can't change a window on my mobile home without asking the county's permission, and this is going on in our front yard. I've been told that the reason exemption was given is because the state does not require a permit to install diesel tank, and that's what the excavation is for, to install a huge holding tank for diesel so that the Woody Creek Station can now, or in the future, offer not only gasoline, but also diesel. It's just preposterous. I wrote some to try to keep it to 3 minutes. So let me read so I can stay within my time frame. First, the sheer amount of dirt being moved is huge and absolutely should be reviewed on any construction in Pickens County. When dirt is moved, the county is involved. Take a look at the second photo, which is that one. This was an email. And note the wheelbarrow to get an idea. Then take a look at the first photo. That would be this one. Can I just set it down here?
Yeah, if you set it down.
Right on top. And this was taken at 2:30 yesterday afternoon, not at rush hour even, and I count 8 cars lined up for gas, a 9th one just leaving, and a Meadow Gold delivery truck. So we have a combination of pedestrian traffic, people lined up to get gas, delivery, people sitting in the picnic benches. You see the man next to his car. It's a mess. It needs planning. Second, the installation of the diesel tanks means that the Woody Creek Station will now be offering two types of fuel, gasoline and diesel. Common sense dictates that traffic volume of vehicles lining up the pumps will be increased. And since some fraction of diesel-powered vehicles are big rigs, we can logically assume that this little quickie mart will now turn into a fueling station for big rigs. This will absolutely change the character of this little, what used to be mom and pop, plus gas station, country store, because now it will turn into a 24-hour diesel depot. This is a huge change in the character of the front door of Aspen Village. The once quiet corner of Picken County is fast becoming a traffic nightmare. Since the change in ownership from Don and Linda Crouch, some of you may know them, they were mom and pop, literally, and they owned the Quick Mart for decades. To WSC Land LLC, not sure who they are, but two names are associated. Ryan Warren and Wendell and Whitman, and the address is Ridge of Red Mountain. I'm wondering if that's a typo, actually, because the name is Woody Creek Station. That would be WCS, but it's registered under WSC, but whatever. Already vehicles are lining up to get fuels or parking in the traffic lanes on a county road, where you see that black little hatchback going behind the Medigold truck. That's a county road, and it's oftentimes people are parked in the traffic lane on the county road, lined up to get fuel. The Sheriff's Department has been called at least once that I know of, it wasn't me, because it was such a mess. Somebody wanted traffic control. This little area combines pedestrian traffic, folks from Aspen Village walking to the bus stop or to get groceries, delivery trucks for the Woody Creek Station, delivery trucks for the sizable nursery. There is now a huge nursery next to the Woody Creek Station. It used to be just a few hanging plants and some petunias. Now it's spruce trees, which you can't fit into the back of your little Subaru Outback. So there are huge trucks delivering stuff and people picking up stuff. There are no sidewalks, and that's kind of a point that I'd like to make. When Bud Eiler was county engineer, he promised us sidewalks from Aspen Village Road is a county road up to the first speed dip, and he promised us sidewalks. There are no sidewalks. It's very dangerous walking down Aspen Village Road to get to the bus stop. This area, in my opinion, is a poster child for why planning is needed. This little mom and pop thing has grown and grown. And by the way, you see in the lower right that shed? Where did that come from? That never used to be there, but since it's changed ownership, little by little, they've added picnic tables, so there's more pedestrian traffic. They've added sheds, and I'm not against it. I'm not saying I'm against it at all. Please be clear. I'm saying it needs to go through the planning process. That is my whole point. And why it was issued an exemption is just beyond my, I just cannot imagine. This is why we have a planning process. So
Ellen, you're gonna have to wrap up.
Yes, my request to you is you direct staff to rescind the exemption, put this through the standard planning process. We're not asking for anything special, just a standard planning process, and so everybody can have input and answer questions such as, what's the traffic pattern going to be? Will there be lighting needed for diesel fueling? What's that going to do to the night sky? What about pedestrian safety? What about increased water usage for the restrooms? That water comes from Aspen Village. What are the implications for increased noise with 24-hour big rigs? What are the implications for increased air pollution with dieseling there, and so forth? Please rescind the exemption, put it through a planning process so we can all get information, all have input, and we can all come out with a happy result for the entrance to Aspen Village.
Thanks, Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. And I know a couple of us have been by there to look down in the hole, so we understand what you're looking at there.
Yeah.
When we see these pictures.
Yeah, okay, thanks for your consideration.
Thanks, Ellen.
Can I enter these into the,
Certainly.
okay.
Give it to Jeanette there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else? Lee, did you put your hand up earlier?
Yes. My name is Lee Mulcahy. I'm grateful for many things, but one of the most things I'm grateful for is to have a pistol for a mom. And she is a Sunday school teacher. And she's just an amazing woman that plans to do 4 more water wells at public schools in Kenya in February. I don't know if any of you guys saw, but your APSHA is your baby. And its executive director wrote a letter to the editor. And I would like to apologize to him. I did call him, but he did not take the call. In the heat of the meeting the other day, you were there. You were there. You know, I think it's unfortunate that you meet in secret on the eviction of a family that built their own home. I think that's real sad. But I do want to apologize to Mike. My father had passed, and I seem to recall that conversation, and I apologize. You know, I was dealing with. We were trying to. My dad was a rancher. You knew him, but he had passed unexpectedly. We were dealing with. Selling our farm, retaining a lot of the implements for future possibilities, but and finishing the home. And I was under a lot of stress, and so I apologize to Mike.
So you are going to, I mean, you can say it to us, but are you going to actually apologize to him in person? Or
I did on the voicemail, but it's not like we're not friends. I mean, we've had 4 hugs recently because we go to the same church. You try to, look, Jesus always said that they'll know, I'm ashamed, I admit, you should know us, you're Jewish, right, George? But you guys should know us by our love. That's what Jesus says. And, if we got these fighting and this nasty stuff going on in the paper, I'm sorry. I apologize to all of you. However, I do want to say that our constitutional right, George, our constitutional right to appropriate due process was egregiously violated by you, by APSHA, and all we're asking, and all we've been asking for the last several years, is please, and thank you for your support, give us a public hearing on our eviction with the new compliance officer. I have my records. I'm ready to show them at any time that I comply as an artist. That's all we're asking, because the way forward, I think, is peace. The way forward is compromise. We're neighbors, and it's unfortunate that that despite my past. With helping humanity, I'm very grateful for my father that started the water well program. I think you should consider me as a neighbor rather than evicting your neighbor, a widow, from the home we built. I hope I haven't run over time, but I wanted to have this one quote that I love. I think that courage is not just about being brave. It's about overcoming fear and daring to do what is right for your fellow man. I've said this before, but I think that the way forward is a non-binding resolution to encourage George and my neighbor Kelly to give us a public hearing on that board. Thank you kindly, and appreciate the time.
Julie? Okay, further public comments?
I do. This has to do with something that's coming up later in the meeting, but is this the appropriate time to bring it up?
Which
Has to do with
item
the
is
open
it?
Space and Trails acquisition of the Wilder property, or Weldon property.
we-
sorry.
You can't stay for the regular
Yeah,
meeting.
we would prefer you could say your comments
At that time?
At that
That's fine.
time, if you're able to stay until
No, I just
then.
wasn't sure when I was supposed to bring it up, so I
Yeah.
can wait. That's fine.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
better, it's more appropriate, and I think it'll have
Sure. No
more impact because the people involved will be actually here and they can hear your
problem.
comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, are there commissioner comments? Patty?
I want to thank my fellow commissioners, Kelly and Steve, I think you were there, for braving the wild waters of the Roaring Fork River and being line judges for the Ducky Derby. The brave of the two of you, but I guess it was a lot of fun. It was an amazing event. I want to thank the community for coming out and supporting it. 20,000 ducks floating down the river quickly, is my understanding. So I want to thank everybody who participated in that. Again, there's some issues going on in Aspen Mountain. John did the public notice go out on the Holy Cross emergency work. Was supposed to be notified. I want to do a little public service announcement. I think it went out.
I do not know the answer to that.
There's going to be an emergency electric line replacement on Summer Road going up Aspen Mountain. So be prepared. There will be some intermittent road closures for public safety. It's really imperative that this line go in, or we may see lack of service on Aspen Mountain this winter if Holy Cross doesn't replace that line. So I just want to give people a heads up to be prepared for that for the next couple of weeks. Other than that, hope everybody's enjoying their summer. And I will be leaving early today for the meeting because I'm heading to California to see my 94-year-old mother and show her new grandson. So thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I have a couple things. Thank you. Lee left. Oh, he's there. Just wanted to thank him for his graciousness and his apology, and also wish his mom a happy birthday this week.
Oh, happy birthday to her.
And then students start school next week, so I want to wish the families and the students returning to school good luck in the school year, and thank Governor Polis and the legislature for passing free kindergarten. I know that will be helpful to some families this year, and this will be the first year that starts. And then finally, I also, in anticipation for our discussion about the tobacco tax ballot language, I want to thank my fellow commissioners, Steve Child and Greg Poshman, for our work on passing the authorizing legislation for that, as well as our colleagues at Colorado Counties, Inc., and our legislative reps for supporting that and giving the county the authority to take this next step in public health.
Good. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay. And just for the record, you were referring to the Ducky Derby. Our colleague Jackie Whitsett, the mayor of Basalt, was also there as a judge, and she didn't have anywhere near the proper footwear to go out on the slippery rocks in the river. So she sat on the bank and
She
watched
supervised.
from the bank.
It was good
Okay.
fun.
Well, we thank Jackie for her time on the bank.
It was fun, and we didn't fall. Nobody fell in the water. It was really fun being out there
Kids
in
were
the middle
having a
of the
great
Roaring
time,
Fork
I heard.
River, especially with the flows more than probably 3 times what they were a year ago at this same time. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the consent items. We have one item, a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners authorizing submittal of a grant application to the State of Colorado Department of Local Affairs Renewable and Clean Energy Challenge for a feasibility analysis of an integrated clean energy system throughout the Aspen Airport Business Center Energy Corridor. And Kara, could you come up and tell us about that, please?
Thank you. Kara Silbernagel in the Pitkin County Manager's Office. So before you today, we came before the board in July in a work session. Department of Local Affairs at the end of June, so it was a very short time frame, announced the Renewable and Clean Energy Grant Challenge through Energy Impact Assistance Funds. $2 million of that are allocated for planning, and $10 million are for implementation projects for helping Colorado reach its 2040 100% clean energy goal. And in working with Holy Cross and community development and RAFTA, and building off of some of the resiliency work that had been done with RMI, and as a result of the Lake Christine event, it came to fruition that there was a real opportunity to tee up our individual efforts between the different entities and really build with this grant funding opportunity, that looking at really new innovating technologies to link together what is apparently called an integrated clean energy system between the airport, the RAFTA bus station and their electric bus pilot program, and then the transmission and electrical systems of Holy Cross between both the substation in Aspen and their assets over at Brush Creek. And so the grant application was due on August 1st, and we submitted an application asking for $200,000 for a feasibility study to look at what it would actually mean to bring these technologies to fruition.
I just want to add something. Kelly just mentioned earlier, we were speaking upstairs about there's a lot going on in that neighborhood, and that I'm just going to put this out there because it's Kelly's suggestion, and I think it's a great one, that maybe as part of what we're looking at throughout that portion, that corridor, so to speak, we can look at how it might be integrated into the WAMP or the West, whatever that stands
West of
for.
Maroon.
It's
West
the,
of Maroon Planning Area.
So we did anticipate that, and Cindy has been part of this group. And in our conversations with Holy Cross, we had actually thought initially about doing the whole neighborhood, potentially doing feasibility on that. Because the technology is so new, they felt it was more feasible to test it
Smaller pilot.
smaller and then look bigger if that works. The logistics seem too much for a pilot project, and so the anticipation is that it would be more of a neighborhood kind of base system in the future if this pilot worked.
It still might be something that we could bring in a segment of into the WAMP, that area master plan. It's something to look at if we're looking at something in that neighborhood, and there's a lot going on in that neighborhood, that corridor section, that maybe we can just, and we'll ask Cindy and see how she feels about that. But yeah, so if we're looking at
So
an
we
area,
are looking at that.
perfect.
Though.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And in saying that, I will make a motion to approve this.
I'll second.
Thanks.
Okay, further discussion and questions. And I do have a comment. Yesterday, I went to an event at Rocky Mountain Institute in Basalt, and Brian Hannigan was speaking about resiliency of the energy supply. And he did mention this project as an example of how Holy Cross could do a microgrid system. And he said they need to start small.
Mm-hmm.
And he also mentioned that at the town of Snowmass Village and the village center, they're thinking of doing a microgrid there also on a small scale, just a couple of buildings close together, because they have to work on the technology to really, before they can take it on the road and expand it to a larger area. So it was an interesting concept about doing these neighborhood energy projects.
Mm-hmm.
So any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Kara.
Thanks, Kara.
Next, we have an item, a ratification of a hearing officer's recommendations sitting on behalf of the Board of Equalization. And I need to have a motion to convene as the Board of Equalization.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are now sitting as the Board of Equalization, and we have Mick Ireland here and Jeanette Jones. And, oh, we got more.
I brought the troops.
Have all the troops.
Jeanette Jones, County Manager's Office. What we have before you today is a ratification of the 2019 valuation, assessor's valuations. And what these come from is taxpayers that have appealed their valuation, and they have chosen to go to the Board of Equalization. The county commissioners chose this year to hire independent referees, hearing officers, and joining me at the table today is Jack Musser and Mick Ireland, who are both officers. Absent is Steve Hawk. He had another engagement, so he couldn't make it, and also Larry Fight with the assessor's office. And what I've asked Mick to do is give you an overview of how we get here and to this day and what we're going to accomplish in this meeting.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can for a multi-thousand page piece of work. The people who are the hearing officers, Jack and I and Steve, are independent. We are not on the side of the assessor. People think we work for the assessor. The assessor has no control. What we do is we preside over short, 15-minute dog minutes, actually sometimes, hearings, so the taxpayer can come in and say, well, we simply couldn't agree with the assessor's valuation of our property. So we review the materials separately and again, and we are bound by the state standards in the statute and the Constitution, the most important of which, and people often forget that, which says, 39103.5a, for those of you keeping score at home, the actual value of residential real property shall be determined solely by consideration of the market approach to appraisal. So, when we review what the assessor has placed as a value, we have to stick to that standard and only that standard. Some taxpayers think, well, my house was worth $1 million last time and now they're valuing it at $3 million. How could that be? The assessor is not allowed to go back to the last valuation, just tack a percentage on. They have to do a whole new market analysis, and that's what we review. So if you challenge your valuation, you come to us and the assessor presents hopefully as close as possible, neighboring properties that sold within the time period, which is the 2 years preceding June 30th, 2018. Only sales in that period are considered, with some exceptions that I won't take up your time with. But that's basically what we do. Larry Fite is the chief appraiser, and the appraisers will come before us with their set of comparisons. You, as a taxpayer, have the right to bring in anything you want, whether it follows the rules or doesn't, or should or shouldn't, and bring in your own comparisons. So Jack and I and Steve basically exercise something that is as much an art as it is a science. And that's because comparing the views between, say, Red Mountain and Owl Creek and somewhere else, that's not clear all the time because each piece of property is unique. The hearings that we have are an opportunity for the petitioner, that is the taxpayer, to bring to our attention things that the assessor can't possibly know. There's a cracked foundation in the basement, but the assessor hasn't seen it, or the property owner has put a conservation easement over it that limits further development. All those things the assessor can't possibly need, and we take those know in advance, so we take that into consideration. Our recommendations are only recommendations to you, and whatever you decide, if you ratify those recommendations, those are appealable by the taxpayer in 3 different ways. The taxpayer can go to district court, which I never recommend because of the expense. Being a lawyer, I know that the amounts involved do not justify litigation very often. Or they can go to binding arbitration, which is a dead-end and final process, and they essentially pay somebody like Jack or Steve to do the hearing over. And it's a brand new hearing. The officers that are not, the hearing officer there is not bound by what I thought or what I said or what I found. And finally, you can go to the Board of Administrative Appeals in Denver, and from there you can appeal your way up until you reach the Supreme Court sometime in your late 90s or 100 years of age. But you could appeal indefinitely. What we try to do, one of our main functions for Jack and I and Steve, is to explain the process to taxpayers, because taxpayers don't always know how the assessor arrived at a valuation. And sometimes when they realize it, they feel better about the valuation, but they do allow us to lower their taxes anyway if we want. Sort of, oh, I didn't know it was that way, but could you look at it anyway? And we do. I have never in 20 years of doing this, once formerly as a county commissioner and now as an independent hearing officer, I've never raised anybody's taxes. So it's a heads you win and tails you break even when you go to a hearing. We don't say, oh, gee, the assessor missed this extra barn out here. We're going to nail you. We don't do that. Sometimes it's lowered. Sometimes it's lowered as much as the taxpayer wants, and sometimes it remains unchanged. It's an important job, though, because the state wants and does audit to ensure that property not only within Picken County is valued fairly, but is valued by the same standards that are used in other counties. So back in 1983, 36 years ago, there was an assessor, not this one, not her predecessor, but back in the day, property values accelerated with tax cuts and redistribution of wealth and all the things that give property taxes a boost, stock markets. And that assessor thought, well, maybe we should give locals a break and tax them differently. But the Constitution is clear. All property, residential property, must be taxed uniformly. So we can't say, well, Bob Child is a rancher and a good guy, and we really like him, but we don't like John over there, so we're going to bang him. Can't do it. The state audits all the results of our work to make sure that it's consistent internally in the county and compliant with the state. Back in the 80s, it was not compliant, and the state came in and they reset all the values. And then they billed you, the county commissioners, for the cost of doing that audit and resetting the values. So we're very careful about that. We try to be fair. We don't try to be perfect because we cannot. We're humans, just as the taxpayers are and the assessors. So I want to do a special shout out here, short, to the people who do the appraisal work and appear before us: Scotty Giddings, Cheryl Hasselbring, Dan Popish, Ryan Gentry, Wendy Schultz, and of course Larry Feit, because I found them to be extremely patient. They've been courteous and professionally prepared, and even when they don't agree with my recommendation or Jack's, they don't get upset about it. They accept that people are going to differ on some of these issues, and they do. And they've done a great job. I don't always agree with them, but I'm glad that we have a professional staff at that caliber that's willing to come in, and sometimes, now and then, as you may know from your proceedings, petitioners or taxpayers become upset with your final result, even though you may feel and should feel that is a right and just result. I'm happy to answer any questions about the process, the appeals, what we arrived at. That's why we're here. Thank you.
Okay, is there more presentation, or should we do questions now, do you think?
We'll just open it for questions, yeah.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have?
Yeah,
Patty and George?
I went through every single one, highlighted some, and just some numbers that didn't come through, and so I already gave those. There were like 3 out of all of them. I gave to Jeanette just so when she does her, what do? You reconcile. When she reconciles all the numbers, just in case those issues came up, I was thinking ahead of all the work Jeanette puts in. And I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you, the 3 of you, and Steve, who's not here, for your time. Lots of time, I know, goes into this, and I saw you in there a lot in meetings, and we really appreciate you're doing this work for Picken County. And Larry, you and your team do a great job. I know you always look forward to August the 5th or whatever that deadline date is.
Right.
So you did it, you made it. And Jeanette, as always, our hero. Jeanette does an amazing job with this, and Julia Ely this year. We appreciate Julia comes in and works with Jeanette when she's here from college, and it gets done. So it's really interesting to see the values were out of, I couldn't even believe some of the values of properties, having gone back for all the years I've been seeing these, and it's pretty exceptional this year. So it's with my thanks, and hopefully we will move this forward today.
George?
Hi, I have a couple of questions. As I went through these, the vast majority, there was no change in the determination from the hearing officers. But there were some changes, and the changes varied from a few thousand to several hundred thousand to several million. And so I picked 3 that I that really stuck out because it was such a vast change. We're talking about millions of dollars in terms of a change in the assessed valuations. And I gave 3 to Larry just to respond to. And this first one, actually, Jack, you were the hearing officer on. This was a Jeffrey H. Palmer Trust, and the schedule number was 13895. And the appraisers had their value at $19,382,100, and the change dropped down to $16,500,000. So about $3 million change, which seemed quite large. And I know there's, as Mick said, it's an art and a science in terms of appraising properties. And the larger the value, probably perhaps a greater chance of a change. But that stuck out because it was such a large change in appraised value from the appraisers to the hearing officer. So that's the first one.
Well, I don't know what I can tell you other than the procedures that were used for this property were by and large the same that were used for all of the sale properties, the appeal properties in Red Mountain. So part of the process includes making adjustments for differences in the land value. So depending on where you're at in Red Mountain, the subject property relative to the comps, there will be adjustments for the underlying land. And then in addition to that, there are adjustments that are made to equalize the difference between the improvements of the sale property in comparison to the subject property. In this case, and in Red Mountain in a general sense, the price per square foot that we use for the adjustments is quite high, just because of the overall neighborhood. And the adjustments that is applied to the improvements gets magnified the bigger the discrepancy or the difference between the size of the subject property and the comp. In this case, in reading Jack's decision, he felt like the adjustments between the size of the improvements was excessive, and so that is what he based his adjustment on. But I'll let Jack speak more directly to that. But all I can tell you is that the procedures that were used for this property in terms of the valuation and the appraisal is exactly the same, for all of the appeals on Red Mountain, and not all received this sort of an adjustment. And I guess the last thing that I would say is, and I think Mick alluded to that, is an appraisal by definition is an opinion of value. And so every person who looks at the comps and makes the adjustments is going to have a different opinion. In this case, the owner provided an appraisal for $12.5 million, which was actually $4 million less than the value that Jack ended up with. And part of the reason why there can be such differences is, for example, fee appraisers aren't required to use the statutory requirements that we are as far as comparable sales, for example. If a sale occurred a year prior to the June 30th valuation date, we are required to apply a time trend that appreciates that sale from the actual sales price to a time-adjusted sales price as of June 30th, 2018. Fee appraisers don't use that same methodology, and so the sales they're using and the adjustment that they are using come with a different set of standards, I suppose, or practices than what we use. But that's exactly why we have the hearing officers, is to look at what we've presented, what the taxpayers presented, and try to come up with something that they feel is reasonable.
Larry, can I borrow that? Jack, you don't have that memorized? R001395?
On this one here, George, if you have a copy of the
I just have
determination.
Yes, I do.
Wendy does most of the homes on Red Mountain. That's her area, that's her bailiwick. And on this particular one, she suggested to the representative, and I can't remember if it was over the phone or,
Petitioner was not present, it says.
the conference
A
call.
tax agent participated in a conference call.
Right.
Michael Rogers.
I'm trying to reconstruct this in my mind, but at that time, Wendy offered the petitioner a compromise of 18 million. And I can't remember, I don't think he was receptive. He continued, to present his case. And through that conversation, there are a number of things. There's usually a backstory to a property. And I can't remember exactly what was here, but he impressed upon me the value should be lower. And I wish I had, some of the exhibits to this, and I might be able to recall a little bit more, but I felt that, the value at 16.5 would be representative of that. And another thing with properties on Red Mountain these past 2 years, and I think Larry will back me up, they've had some really, really incredible land sales around that, mostly on the lower part of Red Mountain. And a number of homes have been purchased almost what they were valued at 3 or 4 years ago, just to be scraped, and new homes built on there. And I think the value of land and the assignment of the land values across the board up there has really changed so much, and whether I did a good job giving my opinion of some of the values. I just can't comprehend some of the values up there as far as the land goes. And I think that probably was the root of why I looked at these a little bit more closely and gave some consideration to the people appealing their values.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jack. I appreciate that. And as you guys know, the petitioner will always say that they're being overvalued, regardless if it's a trailer or a 55,000 square foot mansion.
I said that,
It's
actually.
always overvalued, right? So,
Well,
but I appreciate that. So,
We get a lot of offers to purchase too, right?
yeah, right. So,
Such time
so
as they go to sell
we try to have a stipulation to drop it from 19,382 to 18. The appellant was not receptive to that. Jackie came up with another price. I would suggest perhaps just averaging those two out and splitting the baby. I haven't got a calculator, but if you take the average between the present value and the adjusted value and use that as our determination.
So you want us to reconsider that one specific?
Right. Yeah, I mean, a $3 million drop on a home on Red Mountain, as Jack was saying, they're buying the land for astronomical prices, and then they're scraping and replacing 10,000 square foot houses.
So what was the reference number on that?
So this reference number is 13895. Kelly, Steve.
I just wanted them to do
What
a,
page number is it on in the packet?
It's on page 30.
so when we go to pass this weekend,
And maybe you can do some calculation on that. Put
I
that-
don't have a calculator with me.
Somebody has a
What are
calculator.
the two numbers?
19,382, 100, and 16,5.
And 16.5, no problem.
Kelly?
I just have a further request for some clarification if we're going to reconsider this value, just based on the notes that you provided. Can you just help me understand? I'm really new to this, so I appreciate you explaining it. Where you say the assessor adjusted for the effective age because the home, my commentary, because the home is older than the other comps. I feel that the square footage adjustments led to an excessive valuation. And I don't understand that statement, the square footage adjustment, in this instance.
Do you want me to give it a shot?
Yeah, I think Larry would be
Uh,
better.
So the process is, in an appraisal, to equalize the sale property in comparison to the subject property. So if the sale property is larger than the subject property, then we would make a negative adjustment to account for the fact that the subject would probably sell for something less because it's smaller. Vice versa, if the subject property is smaller, then we would make a deduction from the sale property. If the subject is larger, we would add value to the sale property. In coming up with the price per square foot of how much to add for the additional square footage or the square footage difference, we do an analysis where we look at all of the improved sales on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis. We divide them by a quality rating that we have built into our data. We subtract the land from the total sales price to get just the value of the improvements. And then we divide that improvement value by the heated area of the property to get $1 per square foot of just the improvements. And then we use that $1 per square foot to calculate the difference in value between the sale property and the subject property. So for example, if the sale property is 500 square feet bigger, and in Red Mountain, if we're using $1,300 a square foot, 500 times 1,300 would yield the difference, the increase or decrease in value to equalize the two properties. So that's where I think Jack was saying that the price per square foot that we used in this case he felt was too high.
Because the property at hand maybe wasn't as nice as the compared.
Well, that's a
reference
different
properties.
that's a different adjustment. So we have a separate
That's what
adjustment to account for the quality rating. But I think in this case, just the square footage adjustment was what he felt was excessive.
So I have a procedural question on this one case. As a Board of Equalization, can we make the change, or would we need to remand it back to the hearing officer to review the particulars of it and make another decision?
I think we can make the change.
You make the change.
We're the
We
Board
can
of
make the
Adjustment
change,
Equalization.
because we are the,
We can make the change and just amend the packet before us and reference this,
Okay.
this property number, the schedule number, and the amount that we've decided upon.
The average that Mick did for us, the average between these two differences is 17,941,000. So I think that's kind of a fair way to approach this. That would be my suggestion on this one.
I had noticed there were a couple, one other instance that was a $2 million change from what had been recommended to what was allowed, and that had.
Well, I've got a few, Steve, here. I
Okay,
think
you
I
have
still
some
I
more.
still have the floor, but I'm
some
just
more?
taking this one at a
So-
time.
Or would you care to make a motion on that?
No, we can do it when we make the whole
Or make-
motion.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and continue.
I just have a procedural question as well. Is this a public hearing?
It's not listed as a public hearing.
I don't believe so. We've never done a public
That
hearing.
was,
with Board
it
of
was not,
Equalization.
it's not a public hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's one. My next one is Franklin Mountain Aspen LLC, number 3339, and that's page 110. And here, let's see. Let's see. This was, the assessed value was $23,758,100. And let's see, it was adjusted to $22,758,100. Not as big a change, but my question is, and again, Jack, you're on the hot seat again. Your note says that I think the land value code adjustments may have been a tad excessive, and recommending the total valuation be lowered by $1 million. So I just, I sort of saw that language, a tad excessive, and then it's $1 million difference. That's more than a tad for me.
George.
I'm just reading what.
I agree with you. A tad probably isn't the best description of that, but I have to go back to the land sales that went on up there during the period was just especially I'm talking more about the Ruby properties, I think, along with some of the some other sales just down in Willoughby and things like that. When I say $1 million, I mean some lots up there are valued, over 10, 15 million, and of course there were some sales at 25 million up there too, and the petitioner, I think it was Arnie Simonson, pointed out during our discussion and talked about the different sales, different values of different lots on different locations on Red Mountain, and he impressed me that this land could be valued less than some of the others in different areas, especially down lower. And this Nighthawk is further up the mountain.
The one comment that I would add too is I think it helps to try and keep it in the big picture perspective. So we're supposed to be statutorily within plus or minus 5%. Even deducting $1 million off this total value, that was a 4.2% adjustment. So while the number itself is large, the percentage adjustment to the overall property value, again, we had vacant land sales, just the land itself, for $15 million. And so I think you have to kind of take a big picture view and say, okay, yeah, it's a large number, but relatively speaking, $1 million adjustment on a $23 million property, is not that much different than a $100,000 adjustment on a $700,000 property. So yes, it's a big number, but in terms of percentage and relative to the value as a whole, it's I would say that it's not excessive.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
That one we're leaving as is.
I have a procedural question. Are our hearing officers here assigned locations similarly to what it sounds like your assessors?
No, the appraisal staff, basically each appraiser handles a different geographic area of the county, but these guys have to be the jack of all trades and hear the appeals for all parts of the county.
Thank you.
I have a question about this one and another one mentioned the land code value adjustment.
Well,
What is that specifically?
Can I just go, this one then we're leaving as it is, because I want to.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Again, it just,
Just trying to keep
the
track.
wording
I'm gonna make a
kind of
motion
caught
we
my
got it
attention,
straight.
Jack, more than anything.
I could have
But
chosen.
I understand, you sort of, you've got the range where you work with a normal appraiser, they're allowed even a 10% range, so, yeah. Any other questions on this one? I'm fine with this one now.
Could I get an answer to my question? What is the land code value adjustment?
Well, when we do our comp sale grid, we have to use the software that's in our appraisals. And so the line item for the land value is how it shows up on our comp sale grid is the land code. And so each parcel in the county has a different land code assigned to it that represents, the base value of that lot. And so land code is just the label that is attached to which represents the underlying land value.
Okay, and it doesn't have any reference to land use code or
No,
any
no, no,
county
it's just
reg-
there's a 8-digit code that represents,
Okay.
$6 million for this parcel in West Aspen.
Okay, okay. Go ahead, George.
Oh, the last one is, I had a question on, was Dees, DEES, Aspen LLC. And that number is R015320. That was 107 South 7th Street. And that page is 110, is 153. And I'm not picking on you, Jack, at all. It's just coincidentally, I just went through all these. I went
We
through.
give him all the hard ones.
I've got one for Mick.
And again, your notes are that the sales comparables used by the county assessor were of homes that compared well in the size and quality. The land code value adjustments seemed excessive, which skewed the subject property total valuation upward.
Well, I mentioned kind of backstories about this, and apparently this little area in Aspen has become very popular. And I can't speak to the specifics, but I know I know a certain family has chosen to try to buy homes next door to each other up there, and I think the initial maybe sale was way above what he should have paid initially. Then that tends to skew the value in this case to this subject property, and it pushed that land value up. That's the only thing that I can really pull out of it. And with that, there were comps used. There was one land comp used at the top of Mill. And I didn't particularly agree with the way that was adjusted. And I don't have my comps here, but the one at the top of Mill is right at the bottom of the race course.
Very different.
It's people have fought over that land up there the last 5-10 years and built some pretty beautiful homes. Now, when I think of 7th Avenue, I think of just far enough away that you really don't want to walk into town. It just, this particular, they're saying that the lot at the top of Mill Street is worth $2 million less than the site out on 7th Street, and I don't know. I thought because of that $2 million figure and a few other things going on, there was another sale in here too, 439 Pearl Court, another backstory there. Another billionaire bought that lot next door. There was there are arm's length transactions, but still they have a story that bears some consideration.
Yeah.
And so that's why I gave a reduction on this.
Well, and I think from the assessor's perspective, there have been during this valuation cycle a handful of these pocket neighborhoods that have just had extraordinary high sales. Jack mentioned the Ruby neighborhood, first time they've sold in a generation, in just extraordinary values. On South 7th Street, there was a $20 million sale, which is the one that Jack was referring to, that sold in 2016. And then during this period, about 2 lots up from that, and if you're familiar with South 7th Street, there are a couple of those parcels that are, you go in on 7th Street, but then the driveway takes you down to a bench that's, closer to the river. Well, that was one of the $20 million sales. During this time period, a couple of lots up from that was a $9 million sale, where they scraped the existing house. And so we've got, because we are audited, we can't ignore these sales, but when you take those sales in these extraordinarily high-priced neighborhoods and then try to find other similar excellent quality homes, albeit in another location, the underlying land value that we have from these South 7th Street locations tend to be high relative to, say, the top of Mill or other locations, in town. And so that being said, the sales were the sales, and, we had to use those. But Jack, in his, position as a hearing officer, felt like those were too high, and certainly that's why we have the hearing officers is to make those kinds of adjustments where they feel they're warranted.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. It just shows us how difficult this job is for the hearing officers. And I really appreciate the time and the effort you guys put into this, because this is difficult. And there are backstories, and you are getting different stories from different aspects, and there are anomalies as well. So thanks.
Can I just, and I don't know, George, I don't know if you ever, but Mick and I, well, Mick been doing it anyway, but it used to be that the BOCC did these hearings, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
It was brutal, especially since we didn't have the background that the hearing officers we have. So the learning curve was huge, and I remember the first time, and I said, "I'm sitting as what?" I didn't even know, I didn't had any idea what the Board of Equalization was. And so the training program that I put myself through just to be able to do this, and then you actually get the cases in front of you, and it's a real life scenario, and it is tough, and sometimes you just have to use your judgment. And you're right, I think about the differences between the top of Mill. I'm familiar with that neighborhood, and I'm familiar with 7th Street. They're in my district. And so I know them, and they're very different, and the prices are just cattywampus sometimes over, the Mill Street and then 7th Street. Yeah, so it's a tough one.
So I have two that I have questions on. I think maybe Larry for this first one. It's 305-7, another Mill Street commercial property. And the notes just here say the petitioner has requested an administrative denial for all of these hearing to preserve their right to further protest. And I guess I'm just wondering why they would come to a hearing officer and request this. Are they just looking to appeal this to whatever their next step is, regardless of what the hearing officer's determination might have been?
A lot of the appeals that we get are presented by tax agents, people who are representing the property owners. And there are some instances where, for example, they get drawn into the appeal at the last minute, and they haven't had time to assemble the documentation that they feel like they would like to present or would need to present in order to justify a reduction in value. So in those cases, it's not uncommon for people to request an administrative denial, which keeps their rights to appeal open. But essentially it buys them time to do additional research or collect additional documentation that they may need. And then if they appeal, for example, to the State Board of Assessment Appeals, then that additional information can be brought in, and oftentimes we can settle an appeal at a later stage with additional information that may not have been available as of the date of the CPOE hearing.
So will your office take that on then, or does the hearing officer continue that forward?
No, at this point, the CPOE hearing is closed, and it's been denied, but their rights to appeal further to one of the 3 steps that Mick mentioned before is still open. And so should they collect their information, decide, okay, well, it looks like the assessor's value is okay, then that's the end of that. If they collect additional information and they feel like there's room for further adjustment, they appeal to one of those 3 steps, and then we start an open line of communication
With your office.
in relation to the next level of appeal.
And Kelly, we don't have jurisdiction over a constitutional challenge to the statute. Somebody wants to come in and say the statute is constitutionally infirm because it equalizes properties that shouldn't be equalized or is founded on some misinterpretation. We don't have jurisdiction, so anything we said would just be opinion and worthless, and so they can skip that part of the process and go on to say it violates people's right to, for example, equal education funding. The whole property tax scheme is infirm. That's not a hearing officer.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure you'd love those debates, though. I said, I'm sure you would love those debates, though.
It'd be interesting to hear, but nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And generally, we have more people who requested denial, I remember in the past. You know, it's not uncommon. And so that was good for Kelly to pick that one out, because generally we have a series of those that people just come in late or want to just go to the next level, so.
And then I just have one specific one. I'm trying to find it in my packet, but the Ute City Bank building, which
Okay.
There's a $2 million difference in assessment, but in your rationale is something that I don't understand, which is an adjustment to the capitalization rate that
Right.
you use to
Okay.
bring down their
Right.
value.
Capitalization rate reflects how powerful the income stream is in that property, how certain it is. So if it's a low capitalization rate, like if you take your money and put it in treasury bonds, that is a low rate of return because the certainty of return. So when you have a property where income is more assured because of its location, it's surrounded by all kinds of magnets for tourists and shoppers and good parking.
Which Ute City Bank.
Ute City Bank.
is.
So then the cap rate would be a little lower because that property is more certain and everybody, it's got a great track record. As opposed to say you're on West Main and it's a new thing and it's surrounded by residential. So cap rates, we generally look to Randy Gold and Larry Feit for estimates of cap rates, and they use a big bank of sales to estimate what returns were and what the investments were in various properties and neighborhoods.
Okay, and so lowering that rate reduces their overall.
That increases their value of the property. Because that means they're willing to settle for a smaller income stream on their investment because that's more certain.
So then why would you give the bank, in your notes, you gave them a higher capitalization rate
Which drops the
to
value.
drop their assessed value? So in that instance, for Ute City Bank, given its great location, et cetera.
Well,
what
they have
was the
some real
justification there?
problems there. This redevelopment, zoning regulations that I'm familiar with, the way well, you used to work there, the interior space is not organized in a way that, you waste a lot of space with hallways and things, and it's never developed as a interior gathering space. So it's not the equivalent of something across the street that is fronted right on the sidewalk. So the higher cap rate reflects a little bit of uncertainty about what you can do there with that building in terms of expansion, the difficulty of expanding or remodeling in the face of, well, that remodel conflicts with the historic regulations and so on. So I did put the cap rate up on that by 0.25%, which isn't outrageous, but I think it was fair.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I had a,
I'm good, I'm just,
are you good? I have a couple of questions similar to what Kelly was asking. One had to do with the measurement of the square footage. And in the case of the Independence Hotel, it seemed like they were off by something like 8% on measurement that the homeowner had.
I'm not sure which appeal you're talking about.
Then there was another,
do you have a reference or page number?
They have
sir?
a R0 something something.
let's see, I'll find it here in a second. It's flipping to different pages. So it's on page 99 of the packet, or 98 is where it starts. It's Independence Building Condo Unit 303. And the petitioner had measured the floor, and they came in 8% below what the assessor had measured
Page 98,
that unit as.
Sage Stone.
So it seems like, when you're figuring the price per square foot, if there are discrepancies in the assessor's office of 8% or, you know, some values. I'm wondering if there is a procedure for making corrections to the square footage in units. And I realize you can't do that unless you can actually go into the unit, which doesn't always happen. You can't demand a right to go into a unit to measure it.
Yeah, and one of the things that's unique about condos too is we typically, the floor areas that we use for condominiums by and large come from the condominium plats that were filed. And so the floor areas were calculated at the time the condominium plats were recorded. And so those historic floor areas are tied back to the condominium plat that was originally recorded. We have found cases where, for example, in other complexes, neighbors have enclosed porches and not filed an amended condominium plat to reflect that. One of the things that, and we try to keep up with that as best we can with building permits and that sort of thing, but we're not always 100% successful because sometimes people do work without a permit.
Sometimes.
So at any rate, changes happen over the course of time, and we keep up as best we can, but we're not 100% accurate. What we recommend to people, and what I said to this fellow in particular, is that one of the things that we try to do is keep a level playing field for all the units in a particular building, in that if there are discrepancies in the floor areas, it behooves everybody in the building to do one-stop shopping and fix them all at once, and maybe file an amended condominium declaration, or because what ultimately happens, I think, is their HOA dues are based off of their percentage floor area off of the total floor area in the building. Mm-hmm. And if we reduce one guy because of an independent measurement, and we don't reduce everybody else, and then all of a sudden, not only is he getting an adjustment in his property values, but his percentage interest of the general common elements fees, the HOA dues, may be adjusted as a result. And so what we've tried to recommend to people, and a couple of complexes have taken us up on that, is that if they feel like there's a discrepancy, let's do it all at once, but in the meantime, we're using the historic data, that was generated when the condominium plat was originally filed.
Mm-hmm. There was, and I have one other question, and it was on the addendum that Jeanette sent out yesterday. It was on page 48 of that. Let's see. Well, I'm not sure that's the page. I don't have that in front of me. It had to do with the Hyatt timeshare units, where the timeshares were being valued at a certain amount, but then the whole value of the condominium, all the timeshares of one unit, were a different number. And so the decision was made to just revert to the previous assessed value, because the assessor hadn't looked at the whole value of each of the condominium units.
Well,
so is that, how can we rectify that? Do you need to go back and reassess that? And that won't happen
I don't know
for
that
2 years?
I don't know that that's exactly the case. With fractional condominiums, i.e. timeshares, there's a state requirement that we assign a single value to each unit in its entirety, as opposed to coming up with a different account for each 1/7 interest. And so how we are directed to value fractional interest condos by the Division of Property Taxation is to look at it 2 ways. We look at it both in terms of comparable sales of similarly situated whole unit condos And then we also look at the extrapolated value of the fractional interest sales that are occurring within the complex. And the complexes are all different as far as how their timeshares work. The Hyatt Grand Aspen is one that's more like a traditional timeshare where you buy a specific week and you get that week in perpetuity, going forward. In addition to that, you're allowed so many floating days at either this property or associated properties through the Hyatt Grand Aspen chain. In this hearing, what my position is that the way the Hyatt is set up, they only sell 26 weeks over the course of the year, and the rest of the year is open for floating days. And the sales that occurred didn't represent a full allocation of different weeks throughout the year so as to represent a true indication of the total value. So if you take a 1/7 interest and you're only selling 27 weeks, then the math just, in my view, didn't work to represent the value of the whole. And so my estimate of value per the Division of Property Taxation recommendation was to look at similarly situated condominiums in order to generate a price per square foot for the unit as a whole, not each individual units. And so relative to the Hyatt Grand Aspen, we used the North and Nell. We used the Durant condos. We used the Aspen Alps condos. And similarly situated, we made adjustments to account for location, the quality of the unit, the quality of the complex, and that derived a price per square foot. Steve, the hearing officer, felt that those comps didn't accurately represent the value of the units. But I think I think he also didn't believe that the extrapolated values from those limited sales that they had represented the value either. And so his recommendation, right or wrong, was to change the value back to what it had been for the 2017-18 cycle. And just as a side note, that complex had gone to the State Board of Assessment Appeals in the 2017-18 cycle.
I remember that was.
And the Board of Assessment Appeal at that time established the value that Steve defaulted to. So that value had been through the appeal process in the prior year, and Steve felt like the outcome of that appeal represented the best indicator of value. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, that sheds light on it, so I understand. It's more understanding how those kind of units are valued and the process you have to go through. So I have a much better understanding now. And I think it's imperfect. We have an imperfect way to look at that, maybe because they only sell 26 or 27 weeks out of the year, and that makes it really difficult. Then how do you value for the entire year per unit?
That was my perspective.
Yeah, okay. So that's all the questions I have. Then we get back to.
Well, I would make a motion to approve the ratification of the hearing officer's recommendations with the exception of making one adjusted valuation for the Jeffrey H. Palmer Trust, number 13895, with a new adjusted valuation of $17,941,000.
I will second that.
And procedurally, do we need to look at these each individually and vote on them individually?
No, we
Or-
vote on them.
we have, George had 3 different ones.
No, George only had one we changed.
Only one that you wanted to change. The others you were just asking
Right,
questions about.
my motion is just for the one.
Okay, got it. I
But
thought
is
you were
it-
gonna make a
No.
separate motion
Oh,
on
no,
the
you're not
others.
approving the whole packet with the amended?
No,
I don't-
my motion is to approve the ratification of the hearing officer's recommendations with one exception, and that is to adjust the valuation for the Jeffrey H. Palmer Trust, number 13895, to the new valuation of $17,941,000.
Right. So that means that we're approving the whole packet with the one that we changed.
With that one amendment.
And
Yes.
included in the amended amount.
Yes,
And I seconded that.
thank you.
So George, just one question, what was the previous value that the,
Here,
I don't have that one in front of me.
but we've already got, well, all we need is this number right here that we're changing it to.
Yeah. So it's raising, so it's,
We're changing it from this number to this number from that number.
and I understand about splitting the difference, okay.
We got it. And thank you all again, it's a lot
Any,
of work.
any further discussion on this? All in favor of George's motion?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'll make a motion to adjourn as the Board of Equalization.
Second?
Okay, all in favor of adjourning as Board of Equalization?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate the work you do.
Sure.
When we read through, and I read through every one of your decisions on every one, and it's,
think we
I
all
learn an incredible amount about the thought process you have to go through on each of those units. And I commend you for the job that you do.
Thanks so
Part
much.
of that is a sad commentary. Part of it's kind of makes me proud, so thank you for doing that.
And Steve, if I could interject before the board moves on, we have a little bit of an unusual request to take an item out of order, and that would be item number 7, under public hearing, second readings, the ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners authorizing the acquisition of Lambert Wilden property. Two things have happened. We have a upcoming closing, and we have a wire that needs to go out today for that closing. We have found out that wire needs to be initiated by 2 o'clock today, and we can't initiate it without the board's approval. We, I think, didn't anticipate the first item going so long, and we're a little concerned that we might be getting a little close to that deadline to initiate the wire. So if the board would entertain considering that item next, so that if you do approve this on second reading, we can initiate the wire in time for us to close tomorrow, that would be great.
My only concern would be this is a public hearing, so hopefully people who wanted to speak on this are all here, and they're not, planning on it being later in the day, as per the agenda.
I know there's a couple of people here that want to speak, and I don't think we're going to end up too far off the schedule that
You think
could have
that they
been
would-
anticipated.
Okay. I just
And-
want to make sure we don't want to preclude anybody who wants to.
Yeah,
present.
Patty, and I think a lot of people would have anticipated the first item just like we did. Maybe sometimes that goes a little quicker.
I didn't
Yeah.
anticipate that.
You were smarter than I was.
No, wishful thinking. John, could you raise the blinds too while I got your attention? Thank you.
So, John, just to get straight, what are you asking that we?
We had asked that we take what is currently item 7 on the agenda, the ordinance approving the acquisition of the Lambert Walden property, as the next item.
And move it to number,
Just hear it now.
hear
Just
it now.
Yeah.
And do we need a motion to do that?
I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to hear that item number 7 at this time.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay. Dale.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Well, we're here on second reading, and I guess if you'll bring up the map. Which one? Oh, right, I think it's number 4 down there. To talk about acquisition for the open space program of the Wilden parcel. As we've discussed at the first reading, this property is contiguous to the Faloha Preserve and offers us a much better portal in and out of the preserve than we've had to date. We've had a problem all summer with the other bridge that we've used for various events. Claudia could talk about that too, but the bridge up on we call it the Johnson Bridge, and if you scroll down, there's another map that shows this, has been determined by well, there's the bridge. it's been determined by our engineers at SGM to not be safe for public use this summer, and consequently we've been having to cancel the naturalist events at Faloha Meadows. We have a partnership with the Roaring Fork Conservancy for these firefly walks and things, and we haven't been able to hold one yet. In fact, there's one tomorrow that will also be canceled. The Wilden property has a much more modern bridge that SGM has also looked at and deemed it good to use. And so this property is pretty unique in being contiguous with one of our premier open spaces, and has some infrastructure that is much better than what we have for our ongoing stewardship of Faloha Preserve. In addition to the public tours, we need to get in and out of there for things like weed control. We've done a series of controlled burns in partnership with the White River on the federal land backdrop to Faloha. So having a usable portal in and out is important for not only our naturalist events, but our stewardship of the preserve. We have this approximately 10 acres under contract for $1.55 million. It does include 2 structures as well as the bridge. There are 2 houses on the property. And as noted in the staff AIS, the Crystal Trail planning document highlighted the need to have more of a presence in the Crystal Valley, really regardless of what happens with the valley-wide trail that's discussed in that plan. But we do have seasonal closures at Faloha and also some of our other open space properties in the Crystal Valley, and having a residential structure that might house one of our rangers was seen in that report as something that would be desirable for our program. We do have a similar situation, as you know, in Snowmass Canyon, where we have a CPW officer living on one of our open space properties, and that has had the effect of keeping the closure there extremely quiet. So that's our precedent. This property also includes a nice reach of the Crystal River. There's a big cottonwood gallery down on this map where it says Wilden parcel. That's a pretty wide cottonwood gallery in there. That's one of the finest I've seen in the Crystal Valley. It could be subdivided further with the current zoning, and our acquisition would make that not likely to occur. In fact, impossible to occur. We would essentially be adding on to our investment in Faloha Meadows, and this acquisition was unanimously recommended to you by the Open Space and Trails Board, and you also had the same view of it on first reading. So staff is recommending that it be approved today.
I have some comments.
Just a minute, we'll get to you in due time. Questions from the commissioners? We have looked at this many times in executive session and meeting with the Open Space and Trails Board and various times, so I think we're all very familiar with it. Okay, so this is a public hearing, and I'll open the public hearing now. So I know you want to speak. Does anyone else want to speak on this? You also. So we'll have you come up first. You've been very patient waiting. So you'll come up to the corner seat here and then state your name for the record and make your comments.
Is that on? My name is Claudia Nelson, and I'm a resident of Redstone, and my property is contiguous to this property that you are suggesting to purchase. I also am part owner of Faloha Meadows Resort, and Pitkin County purchased the Faloha Meadows Nature Reserve from my family. I just wanted to make a couple comments about the bridge that was mentioned in the paper, and I do totally understand that the paper often gets things wrong and may have completely misquoted Dale Will here. The bridge on the Johnson property is partly owned by Pitkin County. So maintenance of that bridge is partly responsibility of Pitkin County too. It states in here, and it could be being misquoted, that this bridge was cobbled together late in the late 40s, and that there are no footings, and that the steel posts are sitting on river rock, and that is completely inaccurate. This bridge was rebuilt in the 1990s. There are large cement blocks that the steel girders sit in, and it's not sitting on river rock. That being said, I don't particularly want that bridge open either. I completely understand the necessity of closing that bridge as a justification for purchasing this property and the need for another bridge. The question that I have about the Wilden property is, it shows those 2 parcels there. I am assuming that that second parcel is the easement along DeRay Way, which you have purchased from the Ziegler Trust. Is that correct?
Do you want me to answer this? I'm happy
yes,
to.
yes.
That second parcel is actually a 100-foot wide strip that the Ziegler Trust has agreed to sell to Wilden as part of putting together an assemblage for this transaction.
So it includes that property from the Ziegler Trust?
Yes.
Okay, so that's included in the purchase price, okay?
Correct.
The price to repair the Johnson Bridge was anywhere from $40,000 to $120,000, and the price for this is $1.5 million or more. So anyway, but it does get you more access to that. The other question that I had, and you may be wanting to ask this question too, is where on this property you are planning on putting parking when you do open it up to the public for parking?
All of our purchases are followed by a planning process, and there's a team upstairs that does that, so I can't really commit to an answer on that in advance of that analysis. I would note that there's a fairly large area where the current owners have been parking. There's been some pretty large vehicles in there, and it's just on the east side of that bridge and slightly downstream.
Close to where that big garage is?
Right. That garage was built, my understanding, to handle heavy equipment, large trucks and things. It's, believe it or not, the doors are about 15 feet high and it's 50 feet deep. So that gives you some sense of the scale there. But there is a pretty large area directly in front of that garage.
And that trail that leads from that garage up to DeRay Way, is that how you would then access it?
Well, again, the Open Space Department will undertake planning with all of our landscape people and so on to analyze that question. For now, that is a route that has recently been used and is passable by vehicles.
Will this planning be open to the public comment at all, or public questions?
Yes, our planning for our properties is
open
to the public, and an example that's ongoing right now is the steering committee that's being put together to discuss the future of Penny Hot Springs. So this will have the same procedures that will apply to it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Carolyn Kaufman, and I own the property that is just below where you have the road coming in and the bridge across. That's my property right there. And
This one?
yes, that's my property. And I knew nothing about this at all until I saw your small article in the paper. And I think for myself, it looks like a very good idea. I was concerned about parking and that sort of thing, and Claudia addressed that. My question is, if the board approves this today, is it a done deal, the purchase?
If the board approves this today, we will acquire the property. So that part of it will be done. But again, the planning for exactly what will happen there will be a process that won't be concluded until, further steps are taken with the open space department working with the public and with the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, is just how that was going to proceed. And that would then commence the rest of this year? You'd be working on that?
Yes, our policy is not to program our county uses of these properties without doing some planning.
Right.
So I
Good.
can't commit to how quickly the planning will get done, but I will say that we will not be changing the physical appearance or doing much other than basic maintenance on the property until this kind of planning gets done.
Okay, and that'll be those will be public hearings, and I'll be interested in finding out what you will do. And I suppose it might impact me a bit with the traffic coming down that road. My driveway is separate from the driveway that you will have to access the bridge, but it may mean more cars, but your parking for your visitors would be across the river, right? Not on the highway.
That would be my prediction.
I would hope so, because there's a wide shoulder there, but there are 4 mailboxes, and the post person and the people accessing the mailboxes need to be able to drive by. And so I'm pleased with this idea. I think it might improve the value of my property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, we appreciate it.
I hope to be in
Are there any more public comments at
I
this
don't have a
time?
computer, so
Okay,
I'll let you have my way.
thank you for you two for giving testimony, and I will close the public hearing at this time, bring it back to the commissioners. Patty?
Yeah, I think it's very clear for the public to know that we do have a very public process when it comes to management plans, and we encourage people, especially neighbors and users of properties in our open space inventory, to come forward and put in their comments. It makes for a better plan at the end of the day, and it makes to lessen any unforeseen impacts to neighbors that we didn't think about, because we don't live on the property and you do. So we appreciate that. As Steve said, we've been talking about this for a while. It's critical for us to have access to certain uses at Faloha, not to let it open, and because it still is a preserve and it's still managed very carefully. So I think adding this into the open space inventory is critical, especially with that the easement. We didn't want to have a bridge to nowhere, and this is helping us remedy that. So I appreciate your work, Dale, on this. Thank you.
Well, and I can't let us wrap this up without saying the aloha to the Faloha that Dale introduced to us last time.
You were dying to say that.
I was waiting for him to say it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I do want to note that the Faloha Nature Preserve Management Plan does have that property entirely closed to the public from from October 1st through the end of June. So the amount of time we're talking about where these naturalist events and things happen is only a 3-month period directly in the middle of the summer. So I don't want anyone that might be watching to get the idea that they'll be able to come to this property and access the nature preserve.
So Dale, that does bring up the question, in the management plan, would there be the possibility that the Wilden parcel would be open for some public uses during times when Faloha Meadows is actually closed?
Well, I'm sure the staff upstairs are watching this, and they will jump on me if I make commitments about what will result from their planning. So I really don't want to venture a guess on that.
But it would be potentially
That would be a county decision that could be made after
during the management.
the
plan.
acquisition.
Yeah,
True.
obviously. Okay.
So if you're ready, I'd make a motion.
Yes,
So
please.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the authorization of the acquisition of the Lambert Wilden property.
I will second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Dale.
Thanks.
You got 22
Right.
minutes.
And I just note, Steve, we probably lost people for about 5 minutes for our next item. I don't know if the board is interested in a small break. And
Yeah, I
we
could
can
use a
recollect it.
5-minute break, so,
Oh, this is for the
let's do a
tobacco.
5-minute break, grassroots. I'll be back 1:45.
There you go, Mom. We'll check your skills.
John, heads up for you. You saw after us, the blend is.
Okay, we are back on the air. The next item on our agenda will be the tobacco, sales tax on cigarettes, tobacco, and nicotine products, which we discussed yesterday in our work session.
Right.
So this is the follow-up to that.
Exactly. Good afternoon again. And Karen Kinnaman, Public Health Director, and I have Dr. Levin here with me, and I'll have Kim just tell a little bit about herself, but Kim was really instrumental in getting the City of Aspen tobacco tax passed, so some of the questions that you had yesterday, now we have a resource around. And Kim, do you just want to
Yeah, Kimberly Levin, I'm the Pickens County Medical Officer and an emergency physician, and yeah, I was instrumental in initially passing Tobacco 21 in the City of Aspen, and which also spurred the tobacco tax in the City of Aspen very successfully, and then most recently comprehensive tobacco flavor ban, which I think is a really very important step. And so we're introducing all three, but at this meeting we're talking about the tax, which is the most important in terms of timely putting it on the November ballot.
So we're here today for our first read for the tobacco question, and so we're bringing forth a resolution to you all certifying the county clerk a question to be submitted to the electorate on November 5th, 2019, a ballot establishing a sales tax on cigarettes and all other tobacco and nicotine products. And Kelly, I wasn't able to make your corrections from yesterday, so we'll get that into the second read as far as the title, but we do have it in the ballot language. So as indicated, we spoke yesterday through the work session about the ballot language. So today is really an opportunity to go back, look at the changes that were made, answer some of your questions that you had, and then also review the resolution and ask for approval for that for second read on August 28th.
Okay.
Kim's going to just do a little bit of background about, again, why tobacco tax is so important. I know you all have heard this through work sessions, but we haven't done it in a public hearing, so we wanted to share that with the viewing public as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, just a few points about why this tobacco tax is so important. Price increases, and a lot of the data from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, have been shown to have the largest impact on youth initiation and use of tobacco products. So just by raising the price and putting a tax on it simply is one of the most effective ways. And for every 10% increase in price, there's a 7% decrease in youth use and a 4% overall decrease, it's been shown. Currently, e-cigarettes are not taxed at all in the state of Colorado. There are actually few states that tax them currently, but this is going to be changing very quickly in the future. Colorado state tobacco tax is only 84 cents. One of the highest ones, and I know I showed a map the last time we talked about all this, a map of the United States. New York has $4.35. So Colorado's well in the lowest quartile, low in the lowest quartile among all states in terms of a statewide tobacco tax. So that's why it's really important that we have the ability as a county to place an additional tax, kind of get up to par with what a lot of other states and cities are doing. For instance, the highest is in Chicago, which combined state and local taxes go up to $7.16 compared to our 84 cents. So, so we do have a lot of leeway. And then to maintain their benefit, tobacco taxes must be increased over time to normalize inflation. And so what we're looking at, which is very basically the same that the City of Aspen did, which I think is so important to normalize it with the City of Aspen, and it also is congruent with the state of Colorado, is a $3 tax and then 10 cents a year for the next 10 years to increase to $4 total. And why do we do that 10 cents a year? I know that came up yesterday in conversation as a question. It's really to account for inflation. And so 10 cents a year, and we would start at $3.20 in 2020 to just be on par with the City of Aspen again, but to incorporate inflation. And also I think it's also a good way to pass something and then have kind of an increasing amount it's really hard. I think $4 looks very difficult to pass, and $3 is a lot easier. As we know, 2 years ago in the city of Aspen, the ballot went up for a vote, and there was an overwhelming, it passed overwhelming majority of almost 3/4, so 74%, basically 3/4%. It was very, very strong, and I think in the county, based on that, I believe that there will be very strong positive response to the tax question as well on the ballot in November. I think the other point, which I know you talked about, is filling in the gaps. BOCC did a $2 tax with the 40% on non-cigarette tobacco products, which is we're proposing $3 with the 40%, and the 40% does come from the state. That's a statewide tax, so we would just be in congruence with that. And so just filling in the gaps in terms of geography. So somebody instead of buying cigarettes here, you can go down to the ABC. If we just fill in those gaps simply with the county, I think it's just a very important move, and make a kind of a valley-wide effort to make it just to stabilize it. And then the third point is it will generate some money, and I know that there's in attachment A, it talks about kind of putting the money that it's going to generate, thinking forward. And I know there's a big article in the out in the newspaper today about the city of Aspen that has $436,000 that's been generated, and for the county to think ahead in terms of putting that money into prevention, into health promotion, and instead of kind of looking towards approaching the problem of addiction and in our valley proactively and in a prevention mindset, which I think is really one of the most important ways to change culture and really prevent youth from just even initiating and kind of attacking this whole issue of addiction. Is if you go up front with it, and health promotion and prevention, that's the best way, but policy is one of the most effective kind of back ways of doing it. So you really have to kind of attack it in all ways. And I think, yeah, that was my main points.
Kim? I have a question.
Yeah, Patty.
BOCC's $2 tax, do they have incremental increases to any level?
They don't have an escalator with theirs. I think it was a flat $2 without an increase each year, so they weren't accounting for
Have we
inflation.
thought about talking to them about trying to, as you said, because we have some retailers that sit right there on that county line. So it would make sense to.
That can certainly be a discussion, I think.
Yeah, I
fact
think in
that they
the
pass
future, we
something
got a
and
list of
try to-
future discussions, so I think we should add that.
And in
then see
addition
if-
to that, we know Eagle County is going to be passing their own tax, so how is that going to impact the other half of BOCC?
So you're gonna have BOCC in the
Right.
middle going, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they looking at the same kind of profile at Eagle?
They are. They're looking at, doing another poll, actually, so they're looking at either $3 or $4 is the discussion right now. They are looking at an escalator, but they haven't decided that either. So I think it goes back to Eagle County in September to their BOCC, so they're still working on it. But they sent out a flyer to get some more feedback from the,
So then they won't have their ballot question on this year's ballot.
so maybe I misspoke, so August, because they are going to go for the ballot this year.
So they gotta
Yeah.
get it done quickly for those timeframes? Yeah.
Yeah.
So any day they should be talking about it. I don't see the Eagle County Commissioners until the end of August, August 22nd, so that might be too late, but I'll check in with, Northwest COG meeting, so I'll check in.
That'd be great. I mean, we have really tried to push that consistency model as best we can throughout the community, knowing that is really important. And so as best we can to align with them, we're trying and working through that.
Yeah, one other.
Yeah.
And as per the article in the paper today, I want to commend the city in thinking, especially there, what was mentioned in the article, I don't know where they'll be at the end of the day, was the use for that extra money. I think that's a great idea. That's
Family
a
Connections.
much-needed program at the school system and a great partner. So I want to just put a public thank you out there for the city for thinking about that.
Yeah, I agree.
And just to circle back to one of your questions, as far as why is there a flat tax on cigarettes and then a percentage on other tobacco products, and there's not a really clear answer. It seems like it's very historical. Cigarettes have always been taxed at a flat rate with a dollar amount, and that's the way that the state of Colorado has done that. And so even though there isn't really much reasoning beside maybe some historical reasoning, we think it is good to align with how the state does it. That's how the state tobacco tax comes down, so that there's not confusion with retailers or even with the industry having, nitpicking through that. So I reached out to all experts, and there wasn't really a clear consensus of why that's being done.
I mean, historically, just thinking out loud, cigarettes have been the number one tobacco product, clearly leading it, and to put a flat tax on it and not account for inflation, maybe one way of controlling taxes on it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Because it's not changing over time, but. That's a good point.
Well,
So I have a couple of comments. One is the fact that we picked $700,000 figure. The city of Aspen picked $325,000 on their ballot question, and then they overshot it right the very first year. So I think it's wise that we're putting a high figure, and we anticipate that the tax amount collected is going to be much lower. Second comment, the man who was killed in New York City by the chokehold was selling cigarettes, and he was selling individual cigarettes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I take it must have been against the law, because he was, the police were trying to get him to quit selling the individual cigarettes.
it's against the law here.
Thinking about, now, that's one question. Is that against the law here to sell individual cigarettes? And more to the point, was that a reaction in New York State because they had such a high tax? The cost of a pack of cigarettes would be so high that people maybe wouldn't be able to afford even to get a pack, so they want to buy an individual cigarette.
There's certainly the discussion argument that the higher you raise the tax on the products, that the more it drives a black market. And in terms of public health, I think, you have to keep directed about what is most important in public health, and using those dollars again for prevention, and hoping that, law enforcement will continue to not allow that to happen. But like the black market in cigarettes.
So that could be a consequence of raising the tax here. There could, a black market could potentially
So is
develop.
the argument for it.
Yeah.
I think. I don't think it's a reason not to do it for any reason. Anyway.
Okay. Kelly?
Yeah, I would just comment that, my hope is that we collect $0 from this tax eventually, and, that as this money contributes towards cessation efforts, that, people really opt to not start or find the resources that they need to quit. In my experience, smoking is one of the hardest habits for people to quit. I have several people in my family who just have never been able to shake the habit. I worry for their health. When I went into the Peace Corps, before I left, my dad asked me if there was one thing he could do so that I wouldn't move to West Africa. And I said, you could quit smoking. And that was the end of that conversation. And I went to West Africa for 2 years in the Peace Corps. And I just know it's really difficult. And my hope is that, people have the resources, find the resources through our public health department to give it up and improve their health.
I think it's a really powerful story, and it's true. I think my understanding, only 7% of adults who try to quit are successful, which is so low. And so the key is to never initiate and start the process, and that's why I think a lot of the funds should go towards youth. And yes, if there were a day that we collected $0, that would be a victory.
Yeah, agreed. And on that same note about getting started, I think that's why we need to look into the next questions of flavors and vaping issues and vaping advertising that's now on the national media. Those kind of things. And the age, there's a lot. We made a list yesterday, and we got some work ahead of us, and I think this is a great start.
Great.
So I'll make a motion. Is that okay?
Please.
I'm going to make a motion to approve a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County, Colorado, certifying to the county clerk a question to be submitted to the electorate on the November 5th, 2019 ballot, establishing a sales tax on cigarettes and all other tobacco and nicotine products. This is a first reading, and we're setting for a public hearing and second reading on August the 28th, where we'll bring forward the great changes that Kelly offered yesterday as far as some language in the question and the title.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? I do have one comment. I had 3 family members, my mom and dad and grandma, all smoked heavily. They started when they were teenagers, basically, back in the depression, kind of the depression era. And I lived with secondhand smoke a large part of my life growing up. All 3 of them were able to quit smoking. There were lots of fits and starts and family fights over the thing, but they finally, all 3 succeeded in quitting. My dad ended up dying from lung cancer in the end, and I'm sure it was started because he had smoked for 35 years, starting when he was a teenager. So I really hope that us passing this tax or putting it on the ballot, it's the taxpayers who have to pass the tax. But I really hope that it does get passed and that some kids will not start smoking because of this tax, and therefore not have to go through having lung cancer, which is it's a terrible disease to have to go through and to die from.
Thanks for sharing, Steve.
That's a powerful story, and I think if we even change one kid's life out of this, it's a success. And I'm certain and hoping that it will be influence more than one.
I think on top of the tax increase and the education, I think we've got some pretty good odds out there for us.
Yeah. And also just to add to feeling like you have a lot of work ahead of you in terms of, okay, this is the first step. This is obviously timely and a great first step, and I really feel that the Tobacco 21 and the comprehensive flavor ban will probably not be a lot of work on top of this, and fairly easy to do as well.
And the tough one first.
You do the tough one first, yeah.
Got it.
Just the vote.
So, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks for coming in. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Thank you for your support. Amazing.
So Karen, when are we seeing you again?
Okay, next we have the resolution
Actually, next
approving
week.
an IGA with the U.S. Forest Service. And we have not Brian Pettit, but we have Scott Mattice and G.R. Fielding here today.
Good afternoon, thank you. Yes, I'm Scott Mattice, Picken County Road and Bridge, and with me is G.R. Fielding, the county engineer, taking the place for Brian today, who's out sick. I'm here to present today our resolution to approve the intergovernmental agreement, like you stated, for our Schedule A agreement and our list of roads. Most of you have seen this before. Every couple of years, we bring it forth to you to sign. It's an important document because it gives us the freedom to work with the Forest Service on larger projects if we need, and then to help just work together on those roads and needs for maintenance. Did you have any questions about the list this year? There was a couple additions. The lower portion of Coal Creek Road is an addition. Express Creek Road is an addition, and the Campground Road out in Redstone. That first 500 feet where it tends to flood every year, we've been doing maintenance on that just in help to get those campers out. By adding it to the Schedule A agreement, we can now work with Forest Service staff to clear those mud debris and actually partner in the future on a larger project to help mitigate some of that.
It also, on top of that, it opens that section for grant opportunity. Because it's been such a regular maintenance item for us, there's good potential to do some sort of improvement there to help mitigate those mud flows.
Okay. And that was the question I had was, could you talk about the debris flow catchment area and what's involved? Will that be a joint, will it be road and bridge staff doing the work and then getting reimbursed by the Forest Service, or how would that work?
We've been working on it for about 3 years now, and by putting it on the Schedule A, it opens us up for grant money, and then also it kind of bumps us up the ladder in terms of the regional priority list. We'll work with the Forest Service. The actual location is just basically to the east of the boulevard up on the hillside where it always comes down right before the campground. It would be building a retention pond basically to catch the debris flows. Ourselves and the road crew for the Forest Service usually get the call at 1 o'clock in the morning, hey, there's campers trapped, we need help now. We don't usually have resources in the area, so it's not easy to get there. So by creating this pond, we could actually do normal maintenance or regular scheduled maintenance, yearly or bi-yearly or as needed to scoop out those ponds. The idea would be that we would probably donate our equipment and some personnel, and the Forest Service would show up with either trucks and personnel or vice versa. But we would work together to accomplish that. Yeah.
I know in the LA area, they have quite a few debris catchment areas because of the sort of almost flash floods coming down out of the various canyons. And then I presume that periodically those are going to have to be scooped out again. Do you have uses that you could use the material that has to be scooped out of those?
So far, it's all gone out on 133. We have an agreement with CDOT to fill their horseshoe corner there. They've got a large area they're trying to fill and raise actually elevation of. So right now we're working with them to fill that spot. Ultimately, if that spot fills, it could go probably to our landfill for crushing, cover dirt. There's other options there. But right now we're taking the quick and easy haul to help CDOT there.
One of the difficulties we have with that type of material, Steve, is most of our projects require some sort of engineered material. So the material that we're getting is a certain gradation or something along those lines. That we're just getting what Mother Nature gives us.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we can't always crush it. It needs to be just taken for cover, but yeah.
Okay. Kelly?
I'm curious about the reimbursement rates. So $14,885 from the Forest Service to our budget, I suppose, for your work. Is that an increase in past years?
Correct. That would be basically for that project. We would get refund for that. Our Schedule A agreement, we just do that out of Road and Bridge budget. So there's no money that comes to us. It's just an agreement to do work on the roads. I don't know the exact date this started, but a while ago, the Forest Service realized they didn't have resources, and local counties did. So they made these agreements for us to maintain their roads. But that money would come for reimbursement on that project specifically.
Okay. So just to note again that the Forest Service is not fully funded to the levels that would be helpful for all of the work that they need to do in staffing levels, and that the county is supporting them in those efforts here financially.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
I have one correction. On page 6 of 7, it's under the principal U.S. Forest Service contacts, and then below it says authorized representatives under 13. My name's with an I, just so you know.
Thank you.
Other than that, I think I've done these once or twice before, so if Steve, you wouldn't mind, are you ready?
Yeah, we're ready for a motion.
I'll do a motion to approve. This is a first reading, set for second reading, public hearing on August the 28th.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank
The
you.
maps were great in here, too.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to take up the item 4A, which we added at the beginning of the meeting, which is an emergency resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement between La Plata County for economic assistance services. Samuel.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Lander-Kasper. I'm the Economic Assistance Manager for Pitkin County, and we are here to ask the board to approve an emergency resolution authorizing this IGA with La Plata County to help provide them with economic assistance services. The background in this is La Plata County approached us in April for assistance because they've become understaffed recently, and they're not able to meet their processing guidelines for their programs due to a lack of eligibility technicians. Initially, the staffing fees, the wages for our technicians were a little too high for them to consider it, but since then they've lost more technicians, and they reapproached us a few weeks ago to ask if we could get this pushed through to help them out because they're falling so far behind while they build up their staff and get everyone trained. So the way this is structured is that we have 2 technicians who would be able to dedicate 5 hours of time each week after their normal work hours, and La Plata County will reimburse Pickens County for those overtime fees for our technicians.
Okay. George?
La Plata County is quite a ways away from us. How did that come about that they're working with us versus, did they approach other counties as well?
They have open IGAs with both Conejos and Bent County, and then they reached out to us directly. I'm assuming they probably exhausted their resources in their area. Fortunately, everything can be done electronically, so there isn't any lag in delivering files or things like that.
Patty?
Yeah, it's kind of the same kind of question I was going to. Haven't we had some agreements with La Plata in the past, and we've worked with them? So this kind of is a continuation of a good relationship. No, we haven't. Nan's shaking her head.
Not that I recall.
Maybe our La Plata connection is just Phyllis. The La Plata comes in there somewhere. I think this is a great idea. We're always there to assist, and this is a program that is for assistance. And I think it's important that the people who are in need across the state get the benefit. And if we can help out with that, I think this is a great way to do it. And thanks, staff. Thank you all for reaching out.
Is this IGA open-ended or term limited?
I believe it's term limited and it's limited by the amount. I believe it's up to $10,000 and extends through December, if I remember correctly, whichever comes first.
Thank you. And then we'll extend if needed,
Correct. Hopefully they'll be staffed up by then.
Okay.
So this is an emergency resolution, so it takes effect upon approval by this board, and then we'll set for confirmatory hearing, second reading on August the 28th.
It'll have to be September 11th for noticing.
It'll have to be September 11th for noticing. Thank you, Jeanette.
But we can immediately
Whatever Jeanette says
start
we do.
providing the assistance
Yeah, because it's an
today.
emergency, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
So see,
And
that
I'm-
means you need to sign when you leave, before you leave the building, right?
We need to vote on it first.
We need to have a motion to begin with.
I'm planning ahead here, George.
Let's see.
You never know.
I'll move to approve the emergency resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with La Plata County for economic assistance services.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Glad to help out our friends from La Plata County. They had a pretty severe economic depression because of natural gas prices going down so much, and they've been struggling there. Okay, moving on to the individual consideration items, second reading and public hearings. The first one is a resolution authorizing the submittal of a grant application to CORE, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency, for the courthouse renovation project. Jody Smith, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Jody Smith, Pickens County Facilities Director. And yes, we are here today to do the second reading for a formal resolution to accept. So we applied for and accept the grant once the funding becomes available. So this formalizes that process. And this is for the CORE grant. So that's the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. And so we, so we are applying for funds for a grant to supplement some of the courthouse costs. And we're just asking the board to allow us to apply for the funds and accept them, whatever we end up getting. We did apply for $200,000. I think I've mentioned this to you before, that we won't get anything near that amount, but we'll continue to go after what we can for that project.
I have a question.
Questions?
So we have, actually, the agenda item summary has the 2 grants listed, but we're passing them separately.
Correct.
So the CORE grant is the first, and then the Colorado Court Security Fund is the second.
Thank you.
And it's public hearing for both.
Okay, that's great. Hopefully we can get a grant from CORE. I know that we might not get it, or we might only get part of what we ask for, but that is quite a big project we're working on in the courthouse, and thanks for working on applying for these 2 different grants.
Thank you.
So we need a motion?
No, we need a public hearing.
Oh, it is a public hearing. Is there any members of the public who would wish to comment on this at this time? And seeing none, bring it back to the board.
I'll make a motion to approve a resolution authorizing submittal of a grant application to the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. And if approved, to accept the grant.
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay, and the next one, Jody?
The next one is a formal resolution of the Board of County Commissioners to authorize the submittal of a grant for the Colorado Court Security Fund, and if approved, accept the grant for the courthouse renovation project. Again, we applied for $200,000 originally. So we already submitted the application because of deadlines, and so if we get whatever we get awarded, we'd like to have accepted in a single process. So if there's any questions from you.
Okay, and is this one a fund where, I know some of the ones across the state, it's only the poorer counties that are able to get courthouse funds for some things? Is this one of those kind of grants that
Yes.
we might not get it just because we're a wealthier county?
That is correct. It's
Okay.
based on the median income on 3 different categories. We only meet 1 of the 4 categories of that. And I will say that they already went through their process. They offered us $13,000. I haven't accepted that yet because we had to come through this. That pays for about 1/2 of a magnetometer. So they did find some extra money, and they opened that process again. So I applied for another $100,000. And so we'll see if we can get a few more funds for that. So regardless of the first funding or the second funding, this would be accepting that, any funds that we can get from them.
And again, this is for security improvements for the single entrance at the front of the courthouse.
Mostly the security checkpoint at the main entrance, yes. Some cameras, some locks. That's what we asked for anyway.
Okay. Let's see, this is also a public hearing. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment on this? And seeing none, bring it back.
I would like to comment on this.
Oh, come up to a mic. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Blake Peterson. I'm here today on a different matter, but to comment on this, I used to work in the courthouse next door, and I can note that the security is subpar, and that the courthouse could really use revision of these, and so hoping for approval or acceptance of this to move forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Blake. So,
I'd make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you very much.
Take them down, Jody.
Got 'em.
Right.
Close your
Thanks,
public
Jody.
hearing.
One more.
We have a couple more public hearing items. The next item is a resolution of our board approving an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Aspen for funding of the Castle Creek Trail. We don't have Gary here. What's Gary doing today?
Something very important.
He's building the Castle Creek Trail, hopefully.
That guy works pretty hard. I know, Gary asked me to sit in on this, and my name is Dale Will. I'm the Acquisition Director with Open Space and Trails, this is an IGA that would authorize the county to accept reimbursement of $875,000 from the city of Aspen for the construction that's going on
within the city limits on this Castle Creek Trail. The trail overall is something we've been chasing for a long time, as most of you know, to address the safety issue of getting music students and Aspen Country Day students up and down that road to their campus.
I have
And
a question.
I ask that you approve.
In our packet, we have a draft intergovernmental agreement, Castle Creek Trail final design construction. Then we have an amendment to the intergovernmental agreement, Castle Creek, or it just says Creek Trail. It used to have Castle in there.
My understanding, and I think Rye is more familiar with this than I am, is that the city approved the IGA prior to getting the final contract amount
So
in.
this is our, the draft of the intergovernmental agreement. And it says Creek Trail, it needs to say Castle Creek Trail.
Well, that is true. The one that
The
says,
correct-
so that correction needs to be made, and yes, Dale is correct. The way the city did it is they approved the initial intergovernmental agreement, and then they did a separate action and approved the amendment to the intergovernmental agreement. So what Gary's asking you to do now is authorize a chair to execute the initial intergovernmental agreement as well as the amendment reflecting that the city's gonna add additional funds to the project.
So we can do that in one motion?
It'd probably be cleaner to do it in two.
And I see Steve Scadron on the signature pages, but did he already sign it for the city?
Yeah, both the
both of
IGA
them.
and the amendment to it have already been executed
By the city.
by the city.
Okay.
With the wrong name.
We can talk to them about that.
So then the city is, they're responsible for the part in the city limits, and we're responsible for everything in the unincorporated county part. Is that what the difference in the, how the money is being spent?
I believe that's true.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, this is a public hearing also. Is there any members of the public who wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none from our staff people, I will close this public hearing and bring it back to the board for a motion.
I will make a motion for the first, make a motion for the intergovernmental agreement for the corrected name of the Castle Creek Trail final design and construction.
Second. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Now I will make a motion to the amendment to the intergovernmental agreement for, again, corrected name, Castle Creek Trail final design and construction.
Second. Okay, any further discussion?
I have a comment. Thank you. It's been, I cannot tell you how many terms in office that we've been working on this, and we appreciate this finally coming to fruition for the public safety issues on that section of Castle Creek Trail.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember years ago when you made the attempt to do the trail up there, and then it ended up in the lawsuit, and nothing came out of it at that time. So it's really good to see it finally going in, and it's gone through an extensive process of vetting with the public and making it the best trail that we can, and given the topography and everything.
It's been a long road, but hopefully we're near the end of it on this little project, so.
So all in favor of the
Long
motion?
road for a short trail.
Yeah.
That's very true. Good.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous agreement. We're all on board on this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, now we are moving to land use items.
Okay.
Patty, I think we might be able to get you.
I know, I got an hour to go. You guys are doing good. I was like,
Start talking slower so she doesn't have to be here for the whole
I want to
meeting.
be here for the last one, so it's good timing.
So land use items, this is land use public hearings and ordinance amending Title 8 of the Pickens County Code, specifically the 2006 Land Use Code to amend Following sections regarding water courses and drainage, floodplain regulations.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Catherine Kristoff with Community Development, and this is second reading, and so I'll just remind you that the purpose of this code amendment was a few things. One, to exempt small projects from needing a licensed engineer to do their drainage analysis, to specify a design storm to be used, to ensure that we're compliant with FEMA and the Colorado regulations as far as our development requirements for development in the floodplain, and then finally to adopt our new floodplain maps that have been developed. There was one minor change in the ordinance from first reading. Previously, the ordinance had read 30 days from adoption, and we changed that to become effective upon adoption today because, as you may recall, FEMA will make the maps effective tomorrow. So in hopes that things pass today, it would make sense for this to become effective today.
Okay.
Do you all have any questions for us?
There weren't any changes from first reading?
Okay. And that almost sounds like an emergency ordinance that goes into effect immediately, but maybe it's not.
No, because it's second reading, so we're good.
It is the second reading, so we can set the date in the second reading when it becomes effective. And we're saying immediately.
Right, and that language is in the ordinance.
Okay. Okay, any?
And we're extending the public hearing from the first reading because we are.
Yeah.
So this is a public hearing. Does anybody in the audience wish to make a comment on this? Okay, seeing none. We'll close the public hearing on this and bring it back to the board for a motion and more comments.
I'll make a motion to approve an ordinance amending Title 8 of the Pickens County Code, specifically the 2006 Land Use Code, to amend the following sections of the Land Use Code. Section 7-20-30C, water courses and drainage, and Section 7-20-40, floodplain regulations.
I'll second.
Okay, is there further discussion?
I do have one comment. Thank you for following up on the issue with the snow melt or the snow storage at T-Lazy 7. It appears that they were going to follow up with FEMA. This was years ago to get it out of the floodplain, and it appears that it's still in the floodplain mapping, and that will have to be brought to our attention if they come back in for future use of that space for floodplain, in the floodplain.
Okay. I go by there's a drainage basin below Whitcomb Terrace and the Aspen Valley Hospital housing. So it's kind of between there and the Aspen Chapel.
In the city.
When there's a lot of snow melt or a big rainstorm, that will fill up with water, but then they also have there's a drain that if it gets so high, then the water goes further somewhere. And I've always been curious, where does that extra water go if there's really a lot of water in there? Does it go directly to the river, or does it go to some other basin somewhere?
Receiving water?
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that, but I'd be happy to look into it to understand where that's directed.
I think, having taken my dog there to swim a lot, there's another drainage area on the opposite side of Castle Creek Road, where you turn in to go to the housing there, and then there's a pond.
Okay.
And so I think
On the
that's
Merle
the system
property.
it goes through, on the
Go under
Merle.
well, it looks like it goes under the road towards.
Yeah, there's a
Merle
drainage
property.
ditch there that right now they have a bunch of big boulders in, and then there's that drainage ditch, trickles down or floods down into the pond.
I know
where
there's some drainage through there that
it's a big wetland.
yeah
pond.
that City Parks has worked on over the years, and I think ends up towards the golf course. But
And then it goes from there to the golf course.
yeah, let me look into it and make sure we're speaking about the same area, and I'll let you know.
Definitely in the city.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know these sorts of things properly designed, they end up adding no sort of pollution into the rivers, which
That's
is a
the
good
goal.
thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the John Denver Park is all designed that same way too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see, did we?
You can call the question.
Okay, we did have the motion, I
Yeah.
just was double checking. Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
You're not going to submit your resignation now that you've seen this.
Oh, yeah.
conclusion.
Oh, no, but Catherine, in the future
After
now,
10
these maps
years.
won't come to me, right?
I hope not, yeah.
Just getting all these scary packages from the federal government. I'm like, why am I getting these?
So we need to think up another major
I know,
project
I'll
that
just
you
have
can
to
start
start,
on, then you
yeah.
can have another life-changing relief for a few years.
I hope I
come
don't
back
have
and
any
finish
more.
it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't stick around.
Okay, our next item, we have land use action and ordinance amending Title 8 of the Pickens County Code 2-20-10 and 2-20-180 regarding effect of pending litigation or appeal on development permits.
And you have an hour.
Yeah, I promise I won't take an hour. Yeah, only a few more minutes of your time. So hello, as I said earlier, my name is Blake Peterson. I am the county attorney intern this summer, and before you on first reading is an ordinance amending when an automatic stay on a development permit would go into effect. Current sections 2-20-10D and 2-20-180E create an automatic stay on development permits when an appeal is started, regardless of who files the appeal. And so that stay is only lifted once a final order is issued in that same appeal. Now, the general intent behind this section of code that we're looking to amend is to prevent simultaneous applications and appeals on the same development permit at the same time. However, an affected neighbor can use this section of code as currently is and file a frivolous appeal that causes an automatic stay on an otherwise proper development permit. Now, this affected neighbor is in a way using a shield as a sword against the property owner and there's no punishment or deterrent for that affected neighbor from bringing this stay, this automatic stay. Now, the affected neighbor is using the current code also as a shortcut for essentially obtaining injunctive relief which requested before a district court would carry much greater requirements before obtaining it. This proposed amendment would implement an automatic stay when the appeal is filed by the applicant, the property owner, or a county employee. This would remove the automatic stay from being automatically implemented when anyone else would file an appeal. Now, this is to say this affected neighbor still has this appeal process and is not precluded from obtaining a stay. It just would be through the district courts in the form of injunctive relief. This amendment similarly is keeping with the criteria of land use code text amendments, and it is keeping with what the county attorney's office believes is the code's general intent. The effect that this amendment will have on the BOCC and our community is that the BOCC and the Community Development Director will be holding fewer hearings on these automatic stays, and in that way it will be reducing time and resources spent addressing this. I'm happy to answer any questions.
A question. Does this affect any stays that are currently in effect under the old interpretation of the code?
There is to answer it simply, this would not create a retroactive effect in which stays that are already in place are in some way fined or punished. That would not happen. Instead, what this is doing is it is only amending when the stay goes into effect. And so rather than punishing for having the stay already, it simply is taking away the stay in the future. And so it is only prospectively looking in that way.
Great. Good answer. Thank you.
So if we have a stay in effect now, once this goes into effect, we have the ability to lift that stay and then would fall under this new ordinance?
I believe so.
The stay would go away automatically. There would not be a procedure to
Oh.
lift the stay.
Oh, it goes away automatically. Oh, okay, thanks.
Unless the person who filed the appeal against the property was to go through a different channel and say, perhaps get an injunction.
That's correct.
So I'm just gonna try and play this out in like a layman's word scenario. That's okay. So make sure I understand it. So a land use process comes before us. We hear it for months and months and months. A neighbor has the opportunity to testify in front of us throughout the course of that months and months and months. We make a decision, which generally involves a lot of discussion and review of the code and requests for changes or conditions that we put on that approval. The property owner gets their approval after we've heard the neighbor's concerns. Right now, the neighbor can file a lawsuit for something they think deserves merit in court that automatically puts a stay on that approval right now. But if we change that moving forward, they would have to demonstrate some support for their lawsuit before a stay would be enacted on that approval. Is that a correct interpretation of what we're doing here?
A little point of clarification. The affected neighbor in this case would not be filing a lawsuit with the courts. It's appeal before the BOCC or the Community Development Director. So I just want to make sure it's clear that lawsuit and injunctive relief would be through the district court, which would be outside the scope of what the BOCC would be handling. And then I'm sorry, there was another part of your question.
I'm just trying to make a distinction between what we're doing now. So the neighbor who's gone through this whole public
Sure.
process can automatically get a stay because they've filed an appeal, whether that appeal has merit or not.
Correct. Yes, that is correct.
So we're removing that current relief, I guess, to indicate that their appeal needs to demonstrate some merit as to why the appeal would matter before a stay would be allowable.
Well, we're not implementing some sort of language that says, show us that this isn't a frivolous suit. We're instead almost removing the BOCC from the situation with stays essentially just being held next door in the district court. If someone they can still file the appeal challenging the approval of the application or the development permit, but if that affected neighbor wants the project halted altogether, they would not seek that stay through the BOCC or the Community Development Director. They would seek it by obtaining injunctive relief in the courts, and that is a separate process with its own requirements that they would need to satisfy in order to obtain the stay.
Okay.
And now, if this were to pass today, this ordinance would take effect immediately?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's a two-step process.
Well, this is first reading.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
it doesn't say that. That's why I was
It doesn't
curious.
say first reading.
I apologize. I said that at the beginning, but just to clarify, this is the first reading. The second reading, if allowed, would happen on August 28th.
Okay.
Public hearing, yeah.
Public
hearing.
hearing on August 28th.
Correct.
Yep.
But it would take immediate effect if approved at that time.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. I would accept the
Oh.
motion.
The 30 day.
And I will just add, on August 6th, when I presented this to the Planning and Zoning Committee, it was unanimously approved.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Somebody want to make a motion?
Shelley, it's your turn.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm reading the exact right thing. Okay, I will make a motion to approve on first reading and set for second reading on August and public hearing on August 28th. An ordinance of the BOCC of Pitkin County amending Title 8 of the Pitkin County Code 2-20-10, and 2-20-180 regarding the effect of pending litigation or appeal on development permits.
I'll second it.
Second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Blake,
Thank
will
you for your
be
time.
here, or
Well
will
done.
school have started again?
Sorry, what's that?
Will you be here on the 28th, or will school have started?
School will have already started. It starts on Monday, the 19th. So I think Rye is set to do the second reading for me.
Are you
Thanks for helping us.
Are
and
you
good luck
trusting
this
him
year.
to take that on?
Oh, most definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
We
It's
will
in
hang
very
on
capable
to it.
hands.
We're gonna continue it until you're back here in some future year.
Have a couple of kids and, some other stuff.
And congratulations on your recent wedding.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's
You got married by an exceptional judge. So.
very exceptional. Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have open discussion. Sean?
I just had one item. I got a reminder from the city that they're having a community picnic. I believe that starts at 4 o'clock today at the Red Brick, and wanted to be sure the commissioners were aware of that if you wanted to swing by.
I'm gonna miss
It's also
it.
combined with their children's fair.
I know. It's
So-
the health fair. A lot of health stuff for kids.
They do helmet checks,
Yeah.
seatbelt, car seat checks.
Yeah.
Okay, George.
John, you want to give us an update or clarification from the public comment this morning regarding the excavation at Aspen Village, and also if there's other things that are going on there that we need to look at in terms of going through a normal land use planning process?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Suzanne was not able to stay. So my understanding of what's happening there is that it's actually a replacement of tanks, and so what's involved in the project is the installation of 2 new gas or diesel tanks. We actually do not know what's going to be in those. Whether they'll be selling gasoline or diesel out of them, which is a replacement for 2 tanks that will be removed and cleaned. And this is part of a remediation program that's sponsored by the state to really replace underground storage tanks. And so it is a process that is permitted by the state. The station itself had previously gone through a land use process and was zoned for this use. So this is a maintenance activity, and we would typically, through an administrative process, so it wouldn't be a process that'd come in front of the board as part of a land use action, issue an excavation permit in this case because the state had gone through a permitting process for the replacement of the tanks. Staff did waive that excavation permitting process, but that is not a public process generally anyway. It's not a land use process. There are the other parts of the project, as we understand, is there'd be a replacement of 2 of the existing dispensers. There is no new canopy, no new service. It's really replacement and maintenance of existing infrastructure. The excavation for the tanks is significant. The pictures that were shown show a hillside also in there. So probably, I think a few of you have been out there. I think the hillside is captured in some of that photograph, but it is not right now. There are no improvements that would trigger a land use review.
And should we be concerned about or look at traffic circulation and perhaps the need for a sidewalk for safety for the residents here getting down to the Rafter bus stop?
And we could certainly take a look at that. I don't know about representations of past staff or such that were indicated in the public comment about commitments for sidewalk and such, but it's certainly something that if the board wanted us to look at, we could look at that.
Yeah, there's definitely been increased activity. That's one of the, well, I didn't realize that state was doing an above replacement thing for storage tanks. It's also my understanding that these are larger, therefore they'll have less fueling needs, so they'll have less need for the big fueling trucks to be pulling in and out of there, which is a benefit. I don't know about the shed that she brought to our attention, if that's part of their allowed use with the market itself. I know the picnic tables have been there for years. There was concern about the nursery, the garden center next door. It was my understanding, and if you could check this, that it was supposed to be used for wholesale, not for retail, to minimize the traffic of people coming and going to purchase petunias and hanging baskets. It was supposed to be for wholesale sales, but I could be incorrect in that. As far as the sidewalk coming down the opposite side of the street, it's a significant hill, and maintenance of that in the winter would be very difficult. So some years ago, the county sponsored and installed steps, metal steps that go directly to the bus stop, so people can access. You don't come down the main road, you come down the side road, and so it's open to all the use of the residents there. And that may have been done, I don't remember Bud Eiler ever promising a sidewalk there, but I think the thing was people were cutting down the hillside, so it was decided for public safety issues to put that metal staircase, which does provide them safe access directly to the bus stop. And then they don't have to cross over the streets, it comes right down there. So maybe that's just, maybe a lot of the residents there aren't aware of that, and they come down that hill, but putting a sidewalk there, that's a pretty good pitch. And that in the winter would be very difficult. I mean, we'd have a slip and slide there. But I think that there are some things we should look into as far as the expanded use that's allowed, and just make sure that they're, complying with the conditions of approval when they brought in the nursery. And I don't think they really expanded the use of the store. But I understand Ellen's concerns. And as far as selling diesel there and having big rigs come in, that is not going to be conducive because of the constraints of that, to bring big diesel trucks in there to fuel with diesel. It would take up the whole fueling bay, and then they wouldn't be able to turn around and get out of there. So I think if anything, if they're going to offer diesel, it's just for small vehicles, trucks that use diesel fuel. And, there's a lot of them on the road these days.
And these are a replacement of existing tanks,
Yeah.
and not in addition to.
No, I do think that that word's a little bit misleading, that the state is relying on, replacement to me is you're taking something out and putting something into a hole. They're digging brand new holes to put new tanks with the future planned removal, so that there's no net gain, right? But we've gained a hole.
I think the state's
in this process, so it's not kind of a one-to-one.
I think the state may be
switch.
requiring a different form of tanks. They're kind of going through the process with existing tanks. But my question would have been, because Ellen kept using the word exempt, we exempted them from the land use code?
No, we did not require an excavation permit because the project had already been permitted by the state.
I thought we did give them an excavation permit.
No, we
didn't
did
give them
not
any
require
kind of
one.
permits at all? Because it was all run through the state. And I
Yeah,
think the
my
federal government, EPA, also has an eye on issues like this when you're messing with fuel tanks, especially underground fuel tanks. I think at the end of the day, they'll have less truck traffic from fueling the fuel tanks, and they will have safer tanks that are more secure.
So my question on this is, are they going to remove the existing tanks once the new ones are in there? Which requires another excavation and another hole farther over.
That is our understanding, is that these are replacements, and it will require the removal and cleaning of the existing
Which is
tanks.
done through the state and the EPA.
So those ones will really be in the way because they're right in the circulation pattern of the vehicles coming into the pumps.
I don't know exactly if they're under, Steve, or if they're also off-site. I don't know where those are off the top of my head.
I looked at it, the covers are right in the driveway.
Oh, right in the driveway.
Towards the nursery area from the store.
Okay.
Andrew, one more, if we're done with that one?
Yeah.
For those of you, Patty and Steve specifically, thinking about opening up a hearing for Lee Mulcahy, I think it would be to everyone's best interest to have an executive session so you really understand the facts and not Lee's
Let fill you in. All I have done with Lee Mulcahy is suggest that he go to the city of Aspen and request a hearing.
Okay,
That
he
the county
alluded,
has-
he
No,
alluded.
that the county, I'm supportive of him going to the city, and he is well aware that the
Well-
county has no authority.
Well, even going that far, it would be an education to have an exec session to really understand the history of what the real facts are.
I would encourage
No,
that
my
request
belief
also.
is we can't grant him a public hearing. We don't have the
Authority, it's not an.
authority. It's the
yeah.
city of Aspen or an APSA issue now that APSA has more.
But, yeah, I understand the history
Autonomy.
well, but if you want to have an executive session, I understand it. But I believe that he, rather than keep coming to the county, I believe that he needs to go to the city, because he's in the city, and ask them to work with that at a hearing, but that the county has no authority and no jurisdiction over that. I've been very clear.
Okay, again, I just heard
That's
the
my
way
feeling too.
No.
he was alluding, but that's part of his shtick, right?
Actually, there was a request to discuss the matter, so it's tentatively on the agenda for next week, Tuesday.
Tuesday, I may not be here. It just depends on if I get in. We're coming in late Monday night, hopefully. You never know. So we may not be able to get back here, but so I may not be at exec. I may be here at some point during the day, but I don't know if I'll be here for exec.
Okay, is there any other open discussion?
No, but I'll make a
Accept
motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Aloysius, for being such a good
Oh.
member of the public. Thank you, Grassroots.
He is a good boy. All right.
Yes,